Welcome to Life Stories, where every tale holds a lesson that touches the heart. Today, we share a story of resilience, dignity, and the power of standing up for what's right. It's about a man who, despite facing humiliation and ridicule, chose to rise above it all and embrace a life-changing opportunity. His journey proves that sometimes, the hardest challenges bring out the strength we never knew we had. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and join us as we dive into this powerful story of growth, empathy, and the pursuit of a brighter future. Let's begin today's journey. I had never imagined myself in a place like this. The summit was the kind of venue you only saw in magazines, its towering glass windows reflecting the shimmering lights of the city like a beacon to the elite. The chandeliers hung low, glowing with an almost surreal elegance, their delicate crystals casting a soft, golden hue over everything. Every surface gleamed with opulence, from the polished marble floors to the carefully curated pieces of art that adorned the walls. The hum of quiet conversations, punctuated by the clink of crystal glasses, filled the air. Guests in tailored suits and shimmering dresses drifted between the poolside bar and the intricate lounges, their laughter and clinking glasses echoing in the background. I, however, wasn't there to enjoy the luxury. I was there to serve. At 22, I found myself in the role of a waiter, moving between the crowds with practiced professionalism. My name is Jordan Harris, and although this place was as far removed from my life as it could get, I had learned to blend in. A part of me knew my place. And for the night, I was invisible. The wealthy guests were too wrapped up in their own world to notice the young man in the white shirt and black trousers who was silently moving between them, offering champagne flutes and small plates. I had worked in all kinds of jobs before, but none as luxurious as this. I grew up in a rough neighborhood, where the streets were filled with the sounds of struggle rather than laughter. My mother, who had been battling diabetes for years, needed me more than ever. My younger sister, Kayla, dreamed of going to college, and it was a dream I was determined to help her achieve. That dream was why I was here at the summit, hoping the better pay would finally allow me to provide the stability my family needed. As I balanced the tray of champagne glasses, I couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between my life and the guests around me. Their expensive suits, sparkling jewelry, and easy smiles were foreign to me. They were so far removed from the realities I knew, the kind of people who casually discussed vacation homes in Europe while I stayed up late worrying about the next rent payment. But none of that mattered at that moment. I had a job to do, and that job was to be unnoticed. I had perfected the art of blending into the background, of moving through the night like a shadow, offering drinks without speaking too much or drawing attention. It was my role to be efficient, to make the guests' experience as seamless as possible without ever making myself known. The night carried on smoothly for a while. The guests laughed, mingled, and moved around the venue, enjoying themselves. But then, he walked in, Ryan Hayes. Ryan was the kind of man who entered a room and immediately made the atmosphere shift. Tall, handsome, and dressed in a tailored suit that screamed wealth. He was the heir to a massive tech fortune. But it wasn't just his looks or charm that commanded attention, it was the entitlement that seemed to ooze from him with every step. The way people shifted when he moved, the way they laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny, Ryan's presence had a weight to it. One that made everyone in the room aware of their place. I saw him as soon as he stepped into the room. There was no way to miss him. He moved through the crowd with ease, shaking hands, exchanging laughs, and making the kind of remarks that seemed to hold everyone captive. It wasn't his charisma that caught my attention, it was the way people responded to him as though his privilege gave him the right to treat everyone else like background noise. As I approached him with my tray of champagne, I felt a flicker of unease. My instincts told me to be cautious, but I pushed the feeling aside, reminding myself that I was here to work, not to judge. I held out the tray and offered him a glass. Champagne, sir? I asked politely, my voice steady but my hands betraying me slightly. Ryan's eyes locked onto mine, and a smirk played at the corners of his mouth. He took a glass, but as he did, he knocked over two others from my tray. The champagne splashed across the marble floor with a sharp, harsh sound that caught the attention of nearby guests. Oh, clumsy me. he said with a mocking tone, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Guess I wasn't paying attention. The embarrassment surged up my neck, but I swallowed it down quickly, bending down to pick up the broken glass. I could feel the eyes of the guests on me, some amused, others barely hiding their discomfort. But I kept my composure. No problem, sir, I said calmly, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing inside me. Ryan leaned in just enough for me to hear him. You're pretty good at cleaning up messes. I bet that's not the first time you've been on your knees. He whispered, his words like a slap to my face. I could feel the anger rising in my chest. But I refused to react. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. I focused on the glass, carefully picking up the broken pieces and keeping my expression neutral. As I worked, the murmurs of the crowd began to fade, and the party continued as though nothing had happened. Ryan straightened up, brushing off the incident like it was a minor inconvenience, and strolled away, leaving me behind. But the sting of his words lingered in my mind. I wanted to say something, to confront him, but I knew that wasn't my place. My job wasn't to challenge the guests or make a scene. My job was to serve, to blend into the background, and to endure whatever came my way. With the glasses in hand, I made my way toward the staff area to dispose of the broken pieces. My heart was still pounding with humiliation, but I pushed the feeling down. This job was too important. I had to make it through tonight without letting anyone see me falter. The party carried on, but for me, it had become the longest night of my life. The weight of that broken glass, both literal and metaphorical, felt heavier with every step. And as I stood in the staff restroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror, I couldn't help but think, was it all worth it? The night stretched on, but for me, it felt like time had slowed. I tried to shake off the humiliation, to regain my composure, but it lingered, gnawing at me with every step. As I stood in the staff restroom, splashing cold water on my face, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. The fluorescent lights highlighted the tension in my jaw, the faint trembling in my hands. I could hear the laughter, the conversations from the main hall, a stark contrast to the chaos of emotions inside me. I forced myself to breathe deeply, trying to center myself. The weight of the broken glass I had just cleaned up felt almost symbolic, each shard representing the ways I had been pushed to the margins. Dismissed, humiliated, I didn't belong here. I knew it, the kind of life I had known, where every meal counted, where every dollar was hard-earned, was so far removed from the glittering luxury of the summit. The world I was serving didn't care about the struggles I faced, the dreams I held for my sister's future, or the sacrifices I made for my family. I wasn't even a person in their eyes. I was a part of the background, an invisible figure moving between them like a ghost. But I had to keep going. The reality of why I was here, the reason I endured this life, kept me grounded. My mother's health was deteriorating, and Kayla's college dreams depended on me. This job was my lifeline, my only chance to give them a better future. No matter what happened tonight, I couldn't afford to fail them. I took a final look at my reflection and adjusted my uniform, straightened my tie. It was a small gesture, but it gave me a brief moment of control in an otherwise uncontrollable situation. Then I walked back out into the crowd, doing my best to keep my head high and my emotions in check. The party hadn't missed a beat. The music played louder now, the conversations more animated. Guests continued to mingle, and I could feel the sharpness of their indifference, the sharp contrast between them and the workers like me. As I moved through the crowd, my mind kept returning to Ryan Hayes. That smirk, the mocking tone, the words he'd whispered. It was hard to forget how powerless I had felt in that moment. How invisible he made me feel, as if I were nothing more than an object in his world. I turned my focus back to the task at hand. I had to keep moving, to keep serving. The night would end eventually, and I'd return to my reality, back to the apartment, back to my mother, and back to my sister, who would need me. But first, I had to survive this. I crossed the room again, making my way toward the poolside area. That's when I saw him again. Ryan was surrounded by his usual entourage, the group of admirers who clung to his every word, laughing at his jokes, admiring his wealth, His arrogance was on full display. I couldn't help but notice how he seemed to take up all the space in the room. His presence suffocating. His voice, loud and piercing, cut through the music like a knife. And then, of course, he saw me. Cinderella, Ryan called out loudly, his voice carrying across the space. The guests around him chuckled, their laughter sharp and mocking. My stomach twisted, but I kept my head down, pretending not to hear. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of acknowledging him. I wasn't going to let him drag me into this game again. But he wasn't going to let me go that easily. Come here, Cinderella, he shouted again. Louder this time, making sure every ear in the room caught his call. I froze, my feet unwilling to move. Every instinct told me to turn away, to keep walking, to pretend I hadn't heard. But I couldn't. I couldn't ignore him. I knew that if I did, it would only give him more ammunition to ridicule me further. So, I took a slow breath, forced a smile, and walked toward him. Yes, sir? I asked, my voice as steady as I could make it. Champagne, he ordered with a lazy wave of his hand, his voice dripping with mockery. And maybe some entertainment while you're at it. I forced myself to stay composed. Of course, sir, I said, keeping my tone polite, my hands steady. I took the glass from him and turned to head toward the bar. But just as I did, Ryan grabbed the edge of the tray and jerked it, making one of the glasses fall. It hit the ground with a sharp, loud sound. The laughter from his group was immediate. But the sting of the moment, of the public humiliation, hit me hard. Oops, Ryan said with exaggerated innocence. Careful, Cinderella, wouldn't want you to drop anything else. I bent down, my movements slower than I'd like, and began picking up the shards of glass. Every eye in the room felt like it was on me. I could hear the laughter, the whispers, and I hated how I felt. Like a fool, like I didn't belong. As I straightened up, I found my hands shaking slightly, my pulse racing. My heart pounded as the laughter continued, and I couldn't help but think of how different my life was from theirs. How small and insignificant I felt. The night wasn't over, but in many ways, it already felt like it was. As the evening wore on, I pushed through the embarrassment. I wasn't there to make friends or to fit in. I was there for my family. Every step I took, every drink I served, every insult I had to swallow, was for them. It was the only thing that kept me grounded, that kept me moving forward. But the longer I stayed, the more the night seemed to spiral out of my control. Ryan's laughter echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of my place in this world. And no matter how hard I worked, no matter how much I kept my head down, I always seemed to be a step behind. As the poolside area grew quieter and guests began to slowly leave, I couldn't shake the image of Ryan's smirk. I couldn't forget how it felt to be treated like a pawn in someone's cruel game. To be reduced to nothing more than the help. As I continued to refill glasses and wipe down the surfaces, I kept reminding myself that it would end soon. And when it did, I would go back to the life I knew. The life that I had to return to. The life I could never fully escape. No matter how hard I tried to break free. My mind was consumed with thoughts of my mother's declining health and my younger sister, Kayla, who was depending on me to help her get into college. This job was a small chance at a better future for them both. It was just as I was about to deliver another tray of champagne to the VIP area when I heard it again. That unmistakable voice. Hey, Cinderella, you're still here? Ryan's words carried across the crowded room, his tone dripping with mockery. I felt my stomach twist. But I forced myself to look calm, to not let him see the effect he had on me. I turned slowly, knowing what was coming. I had no choice but to approach him again. His friends had gathered around him, laughing, their faces alight with the thrill of cruelty. They all turned to look at me. And Ryan's grin widened as he spoke again, his words sharp and laced with venom. Come here, Cinderella, I think you owe us another show. I fought to keep my posture straight, to hold myself together, but inside, I was burning with anger and humiliation. Every part of me screamed to walk away, to ignore him, but I couldn't. I knew that if I did, it would only be worse. He wanted a reaction, and I couldn't give it to him. I forced myself to walk over, my feet heavy with every step. When I reached him, he held out an empty glass, letting it slip from his fingers in that deliberate, mocking way. The glass crashed to the ground. And again, the laughter erupted. It felt like everything stopped for a moment. Like the whole world was watching, waiting for me to break. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. Not here. Not now. I knelt down, picking up the glass shards once again, each piece sharp against my skin. The laughter echoed in my ears. But I focused on the task at hand, doing my job, no matter how much it burned. But as I straightened up, the unexpected happened. Ryan leaned in close, his voice dropping to a mock whisper. "Careful now. Don't fall in again, Cinderella," he said, as if his words were some kind of joke. It was too much. He had pushed me, and I couldn't take it anymore. Just as I was about to respond, something shifted in the room. I heard footsteps approaching, firm and deliberate. The crowd seemed to quiet, the energy in the room changing. Ryan didn't notice it immediately. He was too focused on me, his eyes gleaming with smug satisfaction. And then, without warning, a powerful voice broke through the tension. "Mr. Hayes." It was calm, authoritative, and undeniably commanding. The entire room turned as one figure stepped into the spotlight. Richard Maddox, the owner of the summit, the very man who had created this space, walked into the room, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd. His presence was magnetic, and for the first time that night, the air shifted. It wasn't just about wealth or power anymore. Something had changed. Ryan stiffened, his smirk faltering as he realized who had entered. Richard Maddox's gaze met his, unwavering and unblinking. "Mr. Hayes, would you care to explain yourself?" Richard's tone was measured, his gaze colder than I had ever seen from anyone in that room. I didn't understand what was happening, but I felt something deep in my gut, a flicker of hope, of something better. My heart raced as I looked from Richard to Ryan. Could this really be happening? Was there a chance that someone was finally standing up for what was right? For me? The room was silent, all eyes fixed on Richard as he spoke again, his voice carrying across the space. "You've humiliated one of my employees," he said, his voice hard and uncompromising. "And you thought it was funny?" Ryan's face turned pale, his bravado slipping away as the weight of Richard's words landed on him. The atmosphere had shifted completely, and I could feel the tide turning. Richard's words hung in the air, sharp and unforgiving. The tension in the room was palpable, and for the first time that night, it felt like something larger than the party was unfolding. I stood frozen, still holding the tray, unsure of what would happen next. Ryan's arrogance, once so overpowering, suddenly seemed like nothing more than a fragile facade. Richard took a step forward, his gaze never leaving Ryan. "I've built the summit to be a place of sophistication, of mutual respect. It was never meant to be a playground for those who think their wealth entitles them to mistreat others." He continued, his voice unwavering. "And tonight, what I saw was a display of disrespect. Something I will not tolerate in my establishment." Ryan's face flushed a deep red, his mouth opening and closing as though searching for the right words. But none came. He had no response. His confidence, once so brash, had evaporated under Richard's scrutiny. The silence in the room deepened, suffocating him, as if the weight of Richard's words was too much for him to bear. The crowd stood in stunned silence, unsure whether to speak or remain still, their eyes darting from Richard to Ryan, waiting for the inevitable fallout. In the past, someone like Ryan would have brushed off the criticism. But now, in the face of Richard's authority, it was clear that he had no escape. "I think it's time for you to leave," Richard said calmly, his voice still carrying the same firmness. "You no longer belong here." The room seemed to collectively inhale as Richard's command settled in. Ryan hesitated, looking around at the crowd that had been laughing just moments before. Now utterly silent, their eyes filled with something closer to pity than amusement. It was clear that no one in that room was on his side anymore. He looked back at Richard, his pride the only thing still holding him together. "Security," Richard called, his voice sharp. Two burly men in dark suits appeared at his side, their presence imposing as they moved toward Ryan. The billionaire heir's face twisted in disbelief. But there was nothing he could do. With one final, begrudging look at the crowd, Ryan turned and was escorted out of the building. His head hung low, the mockery of the party now replaced by a humiliating silence. As soon as the doors closed behind Ryan, Richard turned his gaze to me. "Come here," he said, his tone softer now, a stark contrast to the harshness he had shown to Ryan. My heart skipped a beat as I slowly approached, unsure of what to expect. I stopped a few feet away from Richard, my mind racing. What was happening? Was I being singled out? I had done nothing but my job. Had tried to stay invisible, to blend into the background. Yet, here I was, the center of attention, not for my work, but for something entirely different. Richard's piercing blue eyes met mine, and for the first time that night, I felt like I wasn't invisible. "You handled that situation with remarkable restraint," he said, his voice calm but filled with an unexpected respect. "Not many people could keep their composure like you did." I blinked, unsure of how to respond. "Thank you, sir," I said quietly, my voice still shaky from the encounter. I didn't want to make a scene." "You didn't," Richard said with a small smile. "But you did something far more important. You stood your ground. You didn't let him break you." His words struck something deep inside me. It was hard to reconcile the man I had just seen humiliate me with the person standing in front of me now, offering not only an apology but something that felt like acknowledgement. For a moment, I felt seen, valued, not as the help, but as someone worthy of respect. Richard paused for a moment, as if considering something. "I want to apologize on behalf of my establishment," he continued, his tone still soft. "No one should ever be treated like that. Especially not in my club." His apology felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. But I still wasn't sure what was happening. Was this real? I had spent so long learning how to avoid attention, how to blend into the background, that I didn't know how to react when someone finally noticed me for something other than my role as a waiter. "You didn't deserve what happened," Richard said, his gaze firm but kind. "And I won't let it go unnoticed. Please, accept my apology." It took everything in me to keep my voice steady. "Thank you, sir," I said again, this time with more conviction. "I appreciate it." Richard nodded, his gaze lingering on me for a moment longer before he turned toward the crowd. "Let's not dwell on this," he said, his tone shifting back to the authoritative voice I had heard earlier. "Tonight is still a celebration, and I think we've all learned something important." As he addressed the crowd, I stood there, still processing what had just happened. Richard Maddox had done something I hadn't expected, something I had never even dreamed of. In one swift, decisive action, he had not only stood up for me, but he had also changed the course of the evening. As the night wound down and the guests began to leave, the weight of everything that had transpired still hung in the air. The echoes of the laughter and mockery were replaced by a sense of quiet reflection. Richard had made his point, and for the first time in my life, I felt a shift within myself. What had started as a humiliating experience had somehow transformed into something far more meaningful. I stood at the edge of the room, watching the last of the guests filter out, when Richard approached me again. His eyes softened as he placed a hand on my shoulder. "You handled tonight with dignity," he said, his voice full of respect. "Not everyone could have kept their composure, especially after everything that happened." I smiled, though it was a weary smile. "I didn't know what else to do," I said quietly, "but I knew I couldn't let it break me." Richard nodded. "That's the kind of strength we need in this world. And that's why I'm offering you an opportunity." An opportunity. The words resonated in my mind like a promise. A chance to finally do something that mattered. Something that could change not just my life but the lives of others too. With newfound hope and determination, I walked out of the summit that night. Not as the invisible worker I had been when I entered, but as someone who had just been given the chance to make a real difference. It was a beginning, a new chapter in my life. Thank you for watching this story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to stay updated with more inspiring stories. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And let's keep this conversation going. See you in the next one.